Victoria al pueblo peruano.
This is Steve Zeltzer, and there's been a coup in Peru that has led to a military pretty much taking over and massacres of a growing number of massacres of working people, peasants, and people protesting this military coup. And we're joined now with Lucrecia Bermudez. She's a Peruvian lesbian living in San Francisco. She was a member of the Immigrant Rights Movement, MDI, candidate for mayor in 1999. She was an organizer of the Papeles para Todos campaign with the May 1st coalition. And in 2000, as part of the MDI, she was put on the ballot for the equal votes rights for the Board of Education and reparations for BayView. And she also was coordinator of the West Coast coordinator of Nuevo Peru por el Buen Vivir, a leftist party of Peru, and a member of the Colectivo Kausachun. She works as a finance manager for nonprofits in the Bay Area, activist, radio, and supported action. So welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So Lucrecia, why don't we first talk about what happened in Peru and how was the newly elected president removed?
Right from the very beginning, during the elections, and when Pedro Castillo was in the first round, he was the candidate that gained more votes, and so he had to go to a runoff with Keiko Fujimori, who is the daughter of Alberto Fujimori, very well known from the 90s. The dictatorship of the 90s, and he is currently in jail for 25 years for crimes against humanity. So in the runoff, from the beginning of the, right after the first election, the right wing, led by Keiko Fujimori, tried to claim fraud and called Pedro Castillo a communist, a terrorist, aligned with, all the countries that the U.S. also has assigned as communist countries in Latin America, like Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, etc. And so Pedro Castillo won the election because the country does not want the Keiko Fujimori to become president, and this had been her third attempt, and she has lost every single time in the runoff because the country does not want them again. So since the election, which the runoff, the right wing of the country, the owners of the country, the ones that own all the companies, the media, all the agriculture, mining, the ones that have the connections with the United States, very deeply entrenched. They started this campaign that it was fraud in the election, in the runoff. And actually, the campaign lasted until just 5 days before he was able to gain and swear as president of the country. And the National Electoral Commission was very clear that he was the winner. So from the beginning of his presidency in July of 2021, they did not stop. They added every single day, week, month after month. They attempted against every minister that he tried to put in all the different ministries in Peru, to the point that Castillo had about 70 people named as ministers in just 18 months because of the constant not only campaign, but trying to discredit him and discredit every politician or every institution that tried to support, and every organization in the country as calling them communists. So this has been going on since the July of 2021, non-stop. Part of the population, not the majority of the population, ought to say, wanted him to dissolve Congress. In the Constitution of Peru, there is this supposedly back and forth setup for maintaining balance of power. So if the president goes to Congress is required to present his ministers, his cabinet, and be approved by Congress. If Congress decides not to approve the cabinet, then that is called the one attempt of vacancy and is one attempt of distrust. The Constitution says with 2 votes of the Congress, not giving the trust to the executive, then the president has the option to dissolve the Congress because Congress is not cooperating, contributing to the affairs of the country. That happened, that attempt really did not happen. There was one time, the Constitution clearly says it has to be 2 times. And there was one time that they didn't give the trust on the executive. But the campaign, as I said, throughout these 18 months have been to discredit and embarrass and attempt to use the judicial system to create this bogus charges and accusations against all of the ministers that were assigned, of the politicians that were assigned to different ministers and different cabinets, to say, like in the United States. So there was these 70 people nominated and rejected by Congress. There have been 2 attempts of Congress, which is the other part of the Constitution, to vacate formally to have an impeachment process. They have tried twice. They tried not only to impeach him, but to suspend him. And every single time, there have been about 3 times that they attempted to do this. The votes were not there enough. And on December the 7th, there was this 3rd attempt, which was going to be brought up to the Congress in the afternoon. Castillo went on the air to a message to the nation around 11 o'clock at noon and gave this speech that had so many similarities to the speech that Alberto Fujimori did exactly the same in 1992 when he did the golpe, the coup against himself, but he had the military behind him. Castillo had no one behind him, no institution of the country behind him. All he did was to sit before the camera and read this speech where he dissolved Congress. He called on the judicial system, the tribunal, which is equivalent to the Supreme Court in this country, to be restructured. And right after, Congress accelerated the session, and instead of having it in the afternoon, they had it at 1 p.m. And at that point, they finally impeached him. He was on his way to the Mexican embassy, apparently after reading the speech and understanding that even his cabinet members started to resign right in the palace, right after the speech. He was all alone. The military didn't follow him. And instead, he was arrested on the way to the Mexican embassy. And he was put in jail since then. And that was the impeachment process. Now, the impeachment process itself had a number of illegalities on it. Congress just jumped on it and created laws, modified laws at the moment to have the impeachment being accelerated. And there was not a proper petition within the Congress, because it has to come from a Congress person, and it has to be brought to a commission, and then the commission has to approve it, and then it is impeached. It is scheduled and it's set, and his advice, his lawyer, and him should be present. Nothing of this happened. They just gathered at the Congress and they said, now we're going to vote to impeach the president, and they did. So that's the reason why a lot of people are saying that this is an illegal coup, an illegal impeachment. The process wasn't followed. There is a number of illegalities, and if the judicial system really were to analyze the way how it was done, it would be thrown up. But that's not the case in Peru, because the judicial system has been taken by the Fujimoristas and the Fujimontesinistas since the times of Fujimori, and they have engulfed the government institutions, the military, the judicial, the tribunal, the constitutional tribunal, the secretaries, as they are called here in the United States. They have infiltrated every single thing, every single space. So this time, what the coup is all about is that this time the Fujimoristas are behind this whole circus that has been put in place. And those are the ones that are right now having the power, and they are exercising the power as they used to do it during Fujimori in the 90s, with massacres, with attempts against every single organization of the people, the peasants, the miners. That's the reason why the country is up now. Everybody was asking, I mean, the demand was to have elections being scheduled before, because the term and how it happens in the country, if a president has been impeached, then the vice president takes the office. And if the vice president is impeached or unavailable or is not the vice president, then the head of the Congress takes the office and calls right away for immediate elections, which is a process of approximately 4 to 6 months. Dina Boluarte, who was the president, unfortunately the first woman president in Peru, she was vice president of Pedro Castillo. But what everybody is seeing now and really trying to understand, it seems to have been an accord, an agreement between the right wing of the Congress and the military to have, and Dina, to have her as president just as a figurehead, because the actual authority comes from the prime minister, who she herself named and is close to her. And this is the guy, Otárola, who is ordering the massacres, the repressions. That is just incredible. It's going all over the country. Pedro Castillo is in jail, and he will be in jail for 18 months during the preliminary process of apparently investigating him on charges of sedition and against the country, against the Constitution, and also of corruption, which are charges for which he had been investigated since August of 2021. Corruption. There is a number of indications that it was probably a case. A number of people have been already arrested throughout this 18 months for corruption within the government of Castillo. And at this point is the demands of the majority of the people in the country are very clear. There has to be an immediate call for new elections. Dina Boluarte needs to resign, has to resign, and that's what the protests do not stop because she needs to resign. The Congress needs to elect a new president of the Congress because the current president of the Congress is being as a retired military man who has taken part in a number of massacres that happened between the 80s at the very beginning of the process of the appearance of Sendero Luminoso under the governments of Fernando Belaunde and the government of Alan Garcia. So he has been involved in massacres, large massacres, Acomarca, Putis. And so he's the president, and the people wants the Congress to elect a new president of the Congress who will be a transition, or pick somebody who does not belong to the major so-called parties in Congress to head the country for the next 6 months during the period of transition to have new elections. And that would be the only way how the people will appease the country in a way.
And what was the role of the United States in this coup?
Well, well, the United States has always been there. The United States, when it created or gave Panama some territories from Colombia, it actually took the northern part of the Amazon, the area, the region of Leticia, and gave it to Colombia in the 1920s. The United States has currently 8 military bases in Peru. And Colombia has 9, now we have 8, and 1 center of operations, which it was started to be built was finally finished built in 2018. And they have 2 bases in the port of Callao, and a port on the north of the country, on the coast, and they have a military Navy drills with the Peruvian Navy in the Pacific, which are probably one of the most important in South America. In the jungle, they have 3 military bases in the Amazon and 1 in the south near the border with Bolivia. So these military bases the United States have in the Amazon control the 4 major rivers that go from the Andes, flow down from the Andes into the Amazon and go into Brazil, being the Amazon River the largest of all. The United States also has a biological center in the region of Amazon, which is the northern part of the country, where there's as many of the biological centers they have in the world. They said they are studying viruses and trying to prevent infections and those kinds of things, but we have no information on what they do. Let's remember also that during the government of Fujimori, and it's right there on their website, the United States through the US aid provided the money and the knowledge and the support to the Minister of Health of Fujimori to force sterilizations in the Andean population. There were about 20,000 women forcibly sterilized in the country. And I think it was in the last 5 years, finally, a number of 2,000 among those who have survived by now, 2,000 women, a little bit over 2,000 women, presented charges against Fujimori for these forcing sterilizations. and it was accepted by the Commission of the International Human Rights, but it has not gone. Judicial process in the country are so slow, and it still is in. Finally, we found a judge that was able to accept the accusation, but the process for the judicial system to set up investigation and the whole thing, it probably will take years. We need to also remember that out of the five presidents that the country has had since Fujimori, except for Fernando Belaunde, but Toledo, Alan Garcia, Ollantumala, Pablo Kuczynski, and Merino, and now Castillo, Pedro Castillo, are being investigated for corruption. Alan Garcia committed suicide before being arrested. Alejandro Toledo is awaiting repatriation from extradition from the United States. He lives right here in Menlo Park. And that extradition process have been waiting for almost 3 years now. So the level of corruption in between the United States and Peru is such that these processes do not go at a rhythm that they need to be seen. Well, the last intervention of the United States has been seen by everyone through TV and photographs in the paper. The ambassador to the to Peru, Kenna, who is an operative of the CIA, was nominated to be ambassador by the Trump administration, by Pompeo. And she met with BayView, who was the Minister of Defense, who had only 2 days in charge. He had been named Minister of Defense just 2 days before. And he met with Kenna the day before Castillo read attempted to dissolve the Congress, and the Congress impeached him. So, and Kenna herself was the very first person to go to the presidential palace before even Dina has had time to sit on the chair to congratulate her and give her the support. Days later, Blinken himself came out publicly and supported the government of Dina Boluarte, even though by that time there have been already 28 killed, assassinated throughout the country. In the last, during the holidays, the people decided to take a pause from Christmas to the beginning of the year. And so the protests and marches throughout the country kind of stopped, because you have to understand that the population of the country is actively informal. That's what they do. They don't work for anybody. They work for themselves, and they try to trade and sell their products. That's the main productive activity in the country. 80% of the population of active for work do informal work on the streets. So they needed that pause during the holidays to try to acquire some kind of money, because they gain the money daily. So the pause was until January 4th, where again the regions north and south and in the Oriente and the Amazon started being active again. And we have also seen in the action in the city of Juliaca, which is in the region of Puno, border with Bolivia, that has a very active trade with Bolivia, because one of the reasons being that the gas, we are exporters of gas. we have large sediments of gas, natural gas. But the gas in Peru for us, which is sold in a small containers, there is they cost approximately $20. For the same amount of gas in Bolivia costs a third of that. If it's $20 in Bolivia, it may cost $6, $7. Now the gas that we have is being exported to Mexico and Chile through a company that has purchased all the gas. And this company belongs to the Carlos of Spain, who was the king of Spain. He's the owner of this Spanish company that buys the natural gas on paper, never takes it out of the country, and it's just then sent to Mexico and Chile directly. And the gas is sold to Spain by a ridiculous amount, and they sell it to Mexico and Chile by the market value. And we don't get on top of that. One of the things that the population wants, besides just that Boluarte, her government leave and new elections are accepted, done in the country, is the change of the Constitution. The Constitution was written during the government of Fujimori, with only participating the right political parties. And one of the things, the most disgusting thing of this Constitution says that any contract that the country has with any company, with any country, any kind of contract that the country engage in, signs for natural resources, being mineral, being gas, being oil, lithium, copper, whatever it is, fishing, they become law contracts, meaning Congress cannot annul them, cannot change them. Nobody can change them except the Constitution. And that's what we want, a new a constitutional assembly to write the new constitution that really protects our natural resources, and they stay in the country.
And you say that the United States has been intimately involved in this military coup, and that the Secretary of State Blinken supported it, Biden's Secretary of State. And this follows up on the coup in Bolivia. Why don't you talk about the relationship of the Bolivian coup and this coup, and if there are any similarities on what the United States did in both these countries?
Certainly, there are many similarities. In Bolivia, part of the right wing in the Congress, supported by the military, called on the last election where the people of Bolivia elected Evo Morales again, because it's been good to the country, and they called for fraud. And they called right away the American States, the Organization of American States, to demonstrate that the election had been a fraud. And the president of this organization, OEA, decided that yes, it was true, and they had the military, and then engaged the military. And there was a massacre in the city of El Alto. There was a massacre in the city of La Paz, and and there were hundreds of people injured. They were forced, the military forced, in that case, able to leave the country, so he had to leave, and they took over and put in jail most of the leaders of the mass movement, which is the movement that the party that to which Evo Morales belonged to. And they pretended to stay there for a full term, of the 4 or 5 years, I'm not sure how many years is for Bolivia, ours is 5, they pretended to stay, but the people again rise up and force the Congress to have new elections. And the new elections, it was finally concluded with a new vote that it actually Morales had won because again, his party won the elections. And they have the new president of Bolivia, who is the same party, and he was a minister of Evo Morales during his last term. This maneuver has been done from the Organization of American States. And it has been supported by different governments, right-wing governments in South America. Bolivia at the time under Evo Morales had expelled the United States out of Bolivia. US aid was out. The Organization of American States had no authority to come to the country unless they were invited. Bolivia was able to do and sign contracts with different governments of the Latin American and of the world, and was able to exploit and use their own resources for the people. One of the things that many things that Evo Morales did, among them, established the education system, got the money that was needed. The health system was boosted with the budget from the government because of the natural resources, was the support to create that budget and support that budget for the growth and well-being of the Bolivian people. That was the attempt in Peru with the Plan Bicentenario, which was the one that took Pedro Castillo to power and that people supported. But that is impossible, that plan is impossible to take place because of the constitution. In Bolivia, Bolivianos changed their constitution. They redacted a new constitution that declares that Bolivia is a plural nation state, recognizing all the diversity of ethnicities in the country and gives everyone equal power and participation in Congress and the different levels of authority, something that is not happening in Peru. That's looking at the Bolivian example and the Bolivian way of how Andean populations, which are the majority of the population of Peru, can really come out of this colonial setup that has been instituted in the country since the Spaniards for 200 years, is the reason why we, particularly in the south of Peru, in Puno, in Cusco, in Madre de Dios, they are so close to the Bolivian people and they trade freely with them. And following the US policies against Bolivia, the Peruvian government has have declared Evo Morales person non grata. And so Evo Morales can't come into the country, and he has always come in and out because they are very close, as I said, with the people in Puno and the people in Cusco. So also the Peruvian government had declared the Mexican ambassador a person non grata because the Mexican government offered Castillo asylum. And Castillo's family was able to get out of the country, and they are in Mexico. Just yesterday, the Peruvian government declared the Cuban ambassador person non grata because of whatever the Cuban president has said about the massacres and the repression that is going on in the country. The same has been said by Bukele in El Salvador. He has also mentioned the repression in the country. I imagine that soon we will declare Bukele persona non grata.
And this, the Bolivia coup was also, I understand, supported by Elon Musk, who said that he wanted the lithium in Bolivia. It seems like this American billionaires see these countries, Peru, Bolivia, as places they can get the resources that the big capitalists want in the United States. Is that the case?
They look at all of us as such. They take all they can from us. You know, they're, I don't know how do they call it, the backyard of the United States. That's the mentality of the governments of the United States, independently of which party it is. They look at us as their servants, that we are good only to provide the mining for gold, which is spread out. The Spaniards savaged the country for gold and silver. The largest mine of gold in Peru is in the north, in the department of Cajamarca. And the company that exploits the gold is a Canadian company. The name is Canadian. The stockholders are US, North Americans. That's the way how is all these companies just go and exploit everything in the country. And Fujimori was the god for them. Fujimori gave them what no other country in Latin America has been able to provide. You rent a space, you have the company comes and takes a space, and whatever they find underneath the soil belongs to them. That's what the Constitution says. It doesn't belong to us, and they are buying it from us. No, it belongs to them. Then they can sell it to us. Once it's extracted, they can sell it to us. And that's what happens. The oil companies all over the place, Spanish, North Americans, British, they extract the oil and sell it to Peru, which is the Peruvian oil company, which once, during the military government of Velasco, belonged to the country. Now, the only reason of existence of Peru is to buy the oil from these companies, Peruvian oil, from these companies to be utilized in the country. It's a total servitude situation that we are. And Peru is very, in South America, is strategically placed. If you, the Spaniards during the conquest, the Spaniards decided that Callao, our largest or oldest port right next to Lima, was the major port for the Spaniards to take out the gold and silver out of the country and all minerals. This is true, and it still is the case now, because it's the door. Peru has the largest coast. Probably Chile has the largest coast, but there is nothing. Chile is at the end of the continent, very close to the Antarctic. So the really a strategic place is the 1,500 kilometers of our coast, which is the Pacific coast. And it's the entry to the center of South America. Recently, I think it was in 2018, still with Vizcarra, the Chinese government was given the concession of one of the ports in the south of the country, the port of Ilo. Recently has been given another port in the north of the country, the port of Chancay. The project of the Chinese was to build a railroad, a fast railroad from the north throughout the coast, from the north, from the side of the, from the coast of with Ecuador in Tumbes to the border with Chile in Tacna, a railroad that crosses the whole coast. And take this railroad into the country, to the south, to Puno, through Bolivia, through Argentina, and the north to Brazil, through the jungles of Peru and Bolivia. That was a project that was apparently in awaiting the signature of Castillo, which was something that was not possible for the United States to take on. Definitely not. All the railroad routes that the British built in Peru in the 1800s had been shut down during Fujimori. Specifically to limit the trade within the country, within the regional trade, Mercosur, La Región Andina, throughout the countries of the Andes. There have been 3 or 4 different treaties created throughout the years of commerce and trade within South America. So one of the reasons to take down the trains, the railroad throughout the country, was to avoid that and simply leave the introduction of products and trade through the ocean, through the coast. And that belonged to certain companies. This latest intention of the Chinese to, as they are doing in Asia and in Southeast Asia too, to extend trade through these new routes. It was the introduction of that was the last drop in the bucket, and they needed to get rid of Castillo right away. Why? Because also in this year, 2023, which is 30 years after the Fujimori dictatorship, when he sold every single company, state company, and privatize the whole thing, even the airlines. He signed contracts for 30 years. Those contracts are over this year, and they need to be extended. All of them need to be extended. And with Castillo, that was going to be impossible. Also, there are 41 mining projects waiting to be signed, new projects that will destroy the Andes, literally. And the whole thing is economics. This whole situation for us right now is because the right wing, with their foreign partners throughout the world, primarily the United States, certainly, but also the European community, the European Union, is to maintain the hold on the vast natural resources that Peru has. Peru is probably the 3rd most diverse country in the world in terms of fauna and flora, meaning in terms of animals that have not been, that are unknown, in terms of plants and agricultural products. The Amazon is a fountain of gold, of life throughout all these different things available. So we are right now at a crossroads, and I think the majority of the population in Peru has finally understood that. The uprising is not 1 or 2 regions, 1 or 2 cities. The uprising is general. Right now, as we are approaching midnight in Peru, people are on the streets. Unprecedented. Lima has been today completely Not that every day there are not protests. Every day there are marches and protests everywhere. But today the people in Lima has a stake, and they are right now in one of the most affluent neighborhoods in Lima. I don't know if I can transmit to you the level of urgency that is present in all the communities in the country. The Quechua community, the Aymara nation, which are the nations of the Andes, the indigenous different nations of the Amazons, they are all rise up. They have risen, they are on the streets, they are calling for civil war, they are not going to stop. This is the time that we cannot stop. Everybody understands that this government, this Congress, and the United States is named right after them, is what we need to get rid of now.
And we're speaking with Lucrecia Bermudez. She has been talking about the situation in Peru, and this is also the 50th anniversary of the military coup in Chile.
Correct.
That overthrew Allende. And the United States, as you say, Democrats and Republicans, they have a bipartisan policy intervening in countries in Latin America. And this also has contributed to immigration, forced migration. These military dictatorships in Guatemala and many countries that the United States has supported. What is the working class in Peru doing? They're mining unions. They have a big history of mining worker unions. Are the unions and workers in Peru organizing as well politically in these demonstrations and rallies?
Another achievement of the Fujimori dictatorship was the destruction of the unions. And it's in the Constitution. With Fujimori, sindicatos or unions stopped to exist. And the workers were, most of them were transferred to be, services. So there were these service companies established where if you wanted to get a job, you had to go through the service, and the service will establish the contract with the company. There is no unions. There is the CGTP, which is probably the oldest workers' union in the country, Confederación General de Trabajadores del Perú, which has been decimated. Under the Constitution, the workers' rights or figures of how you of how you can be, what regiment you could belong as a worker. It takes years. You are a contractor. You could be contracted for 3 months, 6 months, and then extended, and that's how it goes for years. There's no work security. So when you talk about unions, which are almost inexistent, another large union that we had in Peru traditionally was the teachers' union, the SUTEP, which has also been decimated because of the working regiments that were established under the Constitution. So now,
So this AFL-CIO Solidarity Center, which gets $75 million a year from the National Endowment for Democracy, has been involved in trying to overthrow the government in Venezuela, has been involved in Colombia. What are they? Do they have any activity in Peru?
They have. Yes, I've actually looked for the National Endowment for Democracy. Yes, they do have a lot of activity. In the last election, they trained future Congress people. You know, they had like classes in graduations and the whole spiel on how to become a congresspeople and what is that you need to look at and what is, you know, the decisions that you need to take for progress and who are your friends. They are also involved in, I think it was like, I found probably around 14. So they projects active there are available to be seen in the website of the NED. They take small projects too. Agricultural projects, media projects, digital media projects, organization, you know, women's organizations, what we call emprendedores, entrepreneurs, you know, because everybody is into buying and selling these, you know, how to create your small business type of thing. They are involved at that level, but they are also involved with think tanks, which are not very common in the country, but there are, on creating democracy, on supporting democracy and reinforcing democracy, which, you know, they have always done. They are present. Or how to make your party, which is probably mostly around right-wing parties, and we call it right-wing, but they are not right-wings. You have to understand that in Peru, there are not political parties. Parties belong to a person. So we're talking about owners of parties. That's how it works in Peru.
And has this government, the Coosters, the people who are running Peru now, have they outlawed left parties in Peru?
Funny you question that, actually, because the Congress with Dina, this new setup, which many people call usurpadores, has decided that the next elections will be in April of 2024, a full year, more than a year, to have the elections. The Electoral Commission said the elections could be done in 6 months. There's no problem. No, they have given themselves until April of 2024. Because they said they need to make reforms to the electoral process, the electoral law, to make sure that next election, these things doesn't happen. Remember, in the last 6 years, since 2016, we have had 6 presidents. 6 in 6 years. So they said that, and we know that the electoral law needs to be changed, but they are changing it in a different way. They want re-election of Congress people. Currently, there is no re-election. In a referendum in 2018, the people of Peru voted for no re-election of congressmen. They want a Senate. They want to buy 2 chambers. And the people in 2018 in the referendum said, we do not want a Senate at this point because it will be you, the Congress, those who have been in Congress who will become senators. We don't want that. So they want to change, they want to introduce those 2 laws. They already presented a project to outlaw any party that in any shape or forms attempt against the institution, against the democracy in Peru. Any party. That is one of the things they want to pass. One of the modifications they want to introduce. And what the people want in the electoral law, in the new changes to the electoral law, is to have evaluation in the middle of the term. So instead of a 5-year term for a Congress person, to have re-election in the middle at the 2.5 years. And if not, out. That's one of the things we want. We want a Congress that is diverse, meaning people from the indigenous population of the country, large, occupies a number of seats in Congress. People, women occupy a number of seats in Congress. Those kinds of changes. We want an electoral law that does not allow any person convicted or suspected of corruption, accused, actually, not suspected, but accused of corruption, with the process, with an active process, sue again for corruption, not to be part of it. Those are the changes that we want.
And the massacres that have taken place, the military are shooting down people. They're trying to accuse people of protesting of being terrorists. How are people organized, and how are people going to be successful in getting rid of this dictatorship and bringing about more democracy in Peru, and getting rid of the control of the multinationals and the United States government in Brazil?
It is very hard because in Peru, political parties are not stable. Probably the largest political party, coalition of political parties, of leftist political parties, was in the 70s, 80s. And then Sendero Luminoso came to the country. Many, and you know, there have been assertions that Sendero Luminoso, which was not a guerrilla group, but it was an incendiary group, and committed massacres throughout the country during this, we call it, some of us call it civil war in Peru. During the 20 years of civil war between the 80s and 90s, 70,000 people were killed. Half by Sendero Luminoso, half by the military, by the state. And the left political parties were carry that history of Sendero, because Sendero calls itself Marxist-Leninist. And call for the revolution of the people and call to destroy the state. So the leftist parties were left in between. Many leaders of leftist leaders were killed by Sendero. But once Sendero was over and Fujimori was able to institute his dictatorship and destroy the country on the other side with the constitution itself, the left was stigmatized by it all the way to now. If you raise your voice, if you come out with the flag of Peru on the streets and protest, you are called a terrorist. In media, in social media, people said, kill them, just kill them, get rid of them. And the political leftist parties have not had the guts, the strength to come out strongly against the right wing, and has been shadowed by this history, with this memory of the Sendero times. So the left in Peru is very weak. It's very fractured. This operation within the left, too, including Sendero, also points out to the United States. The fractionalism of the left. infiltrating political parties. Even I remember WikiLeaks in some of the, when Assange did that famous dump of communications, I think it was in 2011 or 2012, there were communications from the embassy, US embassy, to the Peruvian state. And so many historians in Peru point at the United States to have nurture the presence, at least the brutality of Sendero Luminoso, something that is very similar to ISIS in the Middle East. Now, that had not been studied consciously, or, you know, there are not the elements to go and clearly establish it. Excuse me, let me put my dog out. There has not been the evidence, clear evidence to point out to that, and probably someday will come out. But the left has not very much ground in the country. Now, the people organize themselves by communities. When I said the Quechua community or the Aymara nation, their decision-making is communal. Everybody participates in the decision-making, and once they decide that, whatever they decide, they go and do it. And right now, what they have decided is that they will not rest until the current government resigns and leaves. And for that, the marches have been organized from the south, from the north, from the Amazon, to go into Lima. And this is being, as we speak, organized on all these regions to walk into Lima. And it is the legacy, the historical memory of the Andean people from the colonizers, from having been under Spanish colonization for more than 300 years, that the only way out is to rebel and put your body on the line. And they know that. It's the numbers. They have no arms. Only they have rocks, stones. That's all they have. But they recognize that their force, their strength is in numbers, which is the only way, because they cannot kill them all.
And the struggle in the United States against the war machine here, against the policies, the corporate policies, the capitalist policies of the Democratic Republicans, the attack on workers here, privatization of Medicare, the attack on railroad workers, taking away the right to strike, the privatization of public education. It seems that the attacks on the working class in the United States, the mass of people, need to be connected with these important struggles of the people of Peru and the people of Bolivia and Mexico who are fighting the same attacks.
It's not only the same. I mean, you mentioned immigration not too long ago, a minute ago. And we are forced to immigrate because our countries are being destroyed. And that wealth is the one that made Europe rich and the United States rich. I think the North American people need to recognize that the status of living that you have and that I have while I'm here is on the backs and the sweat and the work and the lives of the people of our countries. And that is basic. What you need to do is you need to change your government to really reflect what you all are and what we are. Sovereign nations that decide on our own lives, not by the pockets of a few corporations or groupies or deep states of whatever, but the people need to realize that. Here it's very easy in San Francisco to vote every 6 months for nuances that make their life better. But almost every single nuances that are voted here make our lives harder.
Well, the Democrats who run San Francisco, who run California, and they carry out the policies of the billionaires, like the other capitalists. So it's becoming more and more obvious, I think, to the working class. I want to thank you for joining us on Work Week, Lucrecia, and obviously this struggle is going to continue, and there has to be more education, solidarity between the working people, the oppressed in Peru, with the people of the United States.
Thank you very much. Remember, there have been, just yesterday, 18 deaths. We have so far 46 confirmed deaths. Many are injured, hundreds injured, and many are struggling for their lives right now. Even a doctor was killed in Juliaca yesterday. We don't want one more death.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you,
Solidarity.
Steve.